Thanks very much, and thanks for inviting me here today. I was feeling a little out of place when I arrived because so many people had Christian Union t-shirts, and I didn't. Then it dawned on me that as an atheist I have a t-shirt with nothing on it. Which reminds me of my favourite atheist joke, which is, what do you get if you cross a Jehovah's Witness with an atheist? The answer is somebody who calls to your door for no reason at all. So we're talking about morality tonight, and I think we can all agree that morality is the ability to tell right from wrong. However we define right and wrong, and that's really what the nub of it is. And there's a couple of questions that arise in trying to define that criteria. One is does morality exist only in our minds, or does it exist independently of our minds? And the second is, does morality change over time? And both of those questions I'm going to address briefly here. Does morality exist only in our minds? In a sense, it's a distraction, that question, because if morality exists only in our minds, then our task as human beings is to agree together how we live together and what we agree to be right and wrong. If morality exists independently of our minds, then our task is to identify together what is right and what is wrong, which in practical terms is the same task. It's identifying what the criteria are, irrespective of where you believe those criteria come from. Theists will typically believe that God tells them what's right and wrong, and atheists will typically believe that we have to work it out for ourselves. But if you look at the question of if God tells you what's right and what's wrong, a couple of problems arise. The first obvious one is that if you look around the world, is that different people believe that different gods are telling them that different things are right and wrong. And the second is that even if you believe in the same God, different people believe that the same God is telling them that different things are right and wrong. The second problem that arises, which was dealt with centuries ago by Plato in the Euthyphro dilemma, which is, does God, if you believe in a God, does God cause things to be right or wrong by just arbitrarily decreeing it to be so, in which case he could have just as well decreed that random torture is right as that it's wrong? Or does God use specific criteria to identify what's right and wrong? And if he does, what are those criteria? Which brings theists back onto the same plane as atheists of trying to identify what are the criteria that we use to determine whether something is right or whether something is wrong. And I would suggest that most people would broadly agree that the criteria is somewhere in the range of, does this action contribute to or take away from the well-being of sentient beings? Does this action contribute to or take away from the suffering of sentient beings? Broadly speaking, that's the area in which we're looking at when we're identifying the criteria for whether an action is moral or not. And the difficulty is when you bring religion into the equation and you bring faith in God into the equation, is that it's a distraction, because gods appear to say things that contradict things that we intuitively know are right and wrong. If you look at the Christian Bible, for example, you'll read very good passages in it that are morally good, saying that it's good to love your neighbour as yourself, and the story of the Good Samaritan. And in the same book you read passages that suggest that it's a good idea to stone a man to death for gathering sticks on the Sabbath, or to stone a woman to death for not being a virgin on her wedding night, or to kill Babylonian infants by dashing them against rocks. And you read those passages and you intuitively say to yourself, those are bad moral ideas. Now, by making that distinction between the good moral ideas in the Christian Bible and the bad moral ideas in the Christian Bible, what you're clearly doing is you're applying your own intuitive morality to the passages in that book. You're not getting your morality from the passages in that book, because you realise that some of them are wrong. Now that brings us on to say that the second point that I was going to raise, which is, does morality change over time? And clearly, if you're a Christian God, you believe that it does, because the Christian Bible seems to suggest that things were wrong in the past, that Christians today, or things that were right morally in the past, that Christians today would consider wrong now. The two examples I've just given of stoning people to death for gathering sticks on the Sabbath or for not being a virgin on their wedding night Most Christians today would intuitively know that those are wrong. Now, was God right originally and did he change his mind? Or was God right originally and did not change his mind and we're simply wrong today, and it is morally right to stone people to death for gathering sticks on the Sabbath? If you take it even more recently, Cardinal Brady seems to believe that morality has changed since 1975. But in 1975, it was morally right to not tell the police that you knew that a priest had been raping children. In 2010, he believes that it is morally right to tell the police that you know that a priest has been raping children. If you're an atheist, all of this makes perfect sense because you realise that morality evolves by sentient beings gradually figuring out what's the best way for us to live together, based roughly on the principle of sentient beings helping other sentient beings to maximise their well-being and minimise their suffering. And the final question that I'll just touch on is, how do we know whether or not we're right about our beliefs, about right and wrong? And the answer, disappointingly enough, is we don't know, because we can't know. And religious people may claim that they know, but they're only pretending to know, because we don't. All that we can do is make our best effort to increase the amount of well-being and happiness in the world and to decrease the amount of suffering. And we don't need a God to do that, so I'd urge you to reject the motion. Thank you very much.